Valith did not fire his weapon. The question hung in the air between them, and memories rose unbidden from the deepest parts of his mind. His first hunt as a young soldier. The strange feeling in his chest when his target had looked at him with eyes full of fear. The way his instructors had praised him for ignoring that feeling until it eventually went away. He had been trained to see creatures as threats, obstacles, targets to be eliminated for the good of civilization. And he had never once questioned whether the training might be wrong. "I remember my first kill," Valith said slowly, lowering his weapon completely. "A creature called a Vesper. On the ice plains of my homeworld." "Tell me," Una replied, and her voice carried no judgment. It was wounded. "Dying from injuries sustained in a territorial fight," Valith continued. "I was sent to finish it off, to prove that I had what it takes to be a hunter." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "It looked at me before I fired, and I could have sworn it understood what was happening. And I thought I saw something like acceptance in its eyes." "That feeling you ignored," Una said. "That was empathy, Commander. The same thing that makes humans reach for wounded animals, even when it puts us in danger. The collective teaches that empathy for non-sentient life is a weakness." Valith replied. "The collective teaches many things that serve its purposes rather than the truth," Una said, and she gestured for him to sit to his own amazement. Valith sat down on a moss-covered stone, and the creatures around him shifted but did not attack. Una told him everything she had discovered. The ancient research station, the true purpose of the hunter class, the systematic suppression of knowledge about creature intelligence, and the evidence that many species classified as beasts were actually survivors of civilizations, destroyed before they could achieve spaceflight. By the time she finished, the sun had set and the jungle glowed with bioluminescence. "Why are you telling me this?" Valith asked. "I am your enemy, the greatest hunter the collective has ever produced. Because I believe you were never supposed to be a hunter," Una replied. "I think you were supposed to be something else. Something the collective destroyed before you could discover it." Valith thought about his long career. The hundreds of kills, the awards and promotions and praise from his superiors. And for the first time he wondered if any of it had actually made him proud. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Help me end the exterminations," Una said. "Use your authority to buy us time while we build something new." It was an impossible request, a betrayal of everything Valith had built his life upon, and he should have refused immediately instead. He looked at the shadow maw curled behind this strange human woman, and he saw in its ancient eyes the same acceptance he had glimpsed in his first kill. "So, many years ago, the Council will demand answers," he said. "They will want to know why I failed to eliminate the threat. Then give them answers that make them curious rather than afraid," Una suggested. "Tell them you need more time to understand what is happening here." Valith nodded slowly, and something shifted in the air around them. Some invisible agreement formed between enemies who were discovering they might not be enemies after all. 3 months later, Una Park walked into the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Collective, and every eye in the room turned to watch her approach. She was accompanied by her original squad, J1 in his restored military uniform, Thesic with her engineering credentials prominently displayed, and Mara wearing the medals he had earned during 6 decades of service. Behind them walked Valith, and behind him walked representatives of 12 species that the collective had classified as non-sentient beasts, creatures that stood on 2 legs and 4 legs and 6 legs, creatures with fur and scales and feathers, creatures that the council members had never imagined could understand language or negotiate peace. The Shadow Maw entered last, its massive form barely fitting through the ceremonial doors, and several council members rose from their seats in alarm. "This is an outrage," shouted Councillor Drevith, a Valorian whose family had made their fortune in extermination equipment. These monsters should not be permitted in these halls. These representatives have as much right to speak as any civilization member, Valeth replied, his voice carrying the authority of 2 centuries of service. And what they have to say will change everything you think you know about our history. Una stepped forward and activated the holographic display she had prepared, and images began appearing above the council table. Ancient records recovered from abandoned research stations. Genetic analyses showing that dozens of beast species shared common ancestry with known civilizations, and evidence that the collective's extermination campaigns had been targeting the survivors of worlds destroyed before they could join galactic society. The creatures you have been killing are not mindless threats, Una announced, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. They are the remnants of civilizations that the collective destroyed before they achieved spaceflight. And the hunter class was suppressed because its practitioners kept discovering this truth. The council erupted in chaos, with members shouting denials and accusations while others sat in stunned silence. But Una had prepared for this reaction, and she waited calmly until the noise subsided before delivering her final statement. You have a choice, she said. Continue the exterminations and face an alliance of every creature on every contested world, united under commanders trained in the old ways of the hunters, or accept a new path forward. She paused and looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who held the fate of countless worlds in their hands. Humanity will teach what we have relearned. Una continued. We will rebuild the Hunter Academies and train a new generation of mediators who can bridge the gap between civilizations and the creatures who share our galaxy. And if we refuse? Counselor Dreveth demanded. The Shadow Maw stepped forward and released a low rumble that made the chamber walls vibrate. And every creature representative in the room responded with sounds of their own, a chorus of voices that had been silenced for 3,000 years. Then we will protect ourselves, Una replied. And you will discover that creatures who have survived millennia of persecution are very difficult to exterminate. The vote that followed was not unanimous, and several council members stormed out in protest. But the majority chose to listen. 1 year later, the first Human Hunter Academy opened on Korath 4, built on soil that had once been scorched by collective bombs. And Una Park stood at its entrance, watching the first class of students arrive. They came from every species in the galaxy. Young people who had been classified as failures, soldiers who had questioned orders, scientists who had seen something in creature eyes that they could not forget. J1 taught combat and defense, his gray scales now gleaming with health and pride. Thesic managed the technical curriculum, with Sprout the burrowing creature still following her everywhere she went. Morrow ran the medical wing, training a new generation of healers who understood that every life had value. And Valeth, the greatest hunter who had ever lived, taught the history of the collective's crimes so that future generations would never forget. As the sun set on the first day of classes, Una walked to the edge of the academy grounds where the restored jungle began. The Shadow Maw emerged from the trees and pressed its head against her shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around it the way she had done 1,000 times before. Across the valley, students from dozens of species learned to listen to creatures they had once feared, taking the first steps toward a galaxy where understanding might finally replace destruction. They called us failures, Una said to her oldest friend, watching the lights of the academy glow against the darkening sky. They just never understood what we were succeeding at. The Shadow Maw released a sound that Una's translator could not interpret, but that she understood perfectly. Agreement, pride, hope, and something very much like love in the distance. A thornback called to its pack, and the jungle answered with a chorus of voices that had been waiting 3,000 years to be heard. The age of the hunters had returned, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. 6 months had passed since the bombing of Korath 4, and rumors were spreading through the classified channels of the Galactic Collective like fire through dry grass. Something was wrong on the frontier world's extermination. Campaigns that should have succeeded were failing in ways that military analysts could not explain. And creature populations that had been reported as eliminated kept reappearing with impossible coordination on the jungle planet of the SAR-7. A cleanup squad had been surrounded by predators that attacked in perfect formation, driving them back to their base without killing a single soldier, as if the creatures wanted to frighten rather than destroy on the ice world of Ventress 3. Burrowing creatures had collapsed the tunnels, leading to a collective mining operation, cutting off access to valuable minerals, but leaving all personnel alive and able to evacuate safely on the desert planet of Karek Prime. A species thought to be extinct had emerged from hidden caves and reclaimed territory that the collective had spent decades trying to develop. The reports all contained the same impossible detail. The creatures were not attacking randomly but strategically, and their actions suggested intelligence and planning that non-sentient beings should not possess. Commander Valeth stood in his private quarters aboard the battleship Inevitable, studying holographic maps that showed the pattern of incidents across 17 different worlds. He was the most decorated hunter in collective history, with over 200 confirmed kills of high-threat creatures, and he had never encountered anything like what he was seeing now. There is a connection, he muttered to himself, tracing lines between the affected planets. Someone or something is coordinating this. His aide entered with a data tablet containing the latest intelligence report, and the information it contained made Ville's scales flush dark with anger. "We have confirmed sightings," the aide announced nervously. Cleanup Squad 7 from Kareth 4 has been identified on 3 different planets in the past month. Cleanup Squad 7 was listed as killed in action during the sterilization bombing, Valeth replied. "Yes, sir. But our surveillance systems captured images of their members working alongside the creature populations," the aide continued, "including a human female who appears to be directing their activities." Valeth remembered the reports about the human assigned to that squad, the one who had received the failed hunter classification, and he felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "Show me," he demanded. The holographic display shifted to show surveillance footage from the SAR-7, and Valeth watched as a small human woman walked through a clearing filled with apex predators, touching their heads and speaking to them as if they were old friends. The creatures followed her like soldiers following a general, and beside her walked a Shadowmaw, one of the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, its massive form moving with protective purpose. "This is impossible," Valeth whispered. But the evidence before his eyes could not be denied. He had spent his entire career killing creatures because the collective told him they were mindless threats that could never be reasoned with. And now he was watching a human do exactly what he had been taught could not be done. "Prepare my ship," Valeth ordered. "I will handle this personally." Meanwhile, on the forest floor of the SAR-7, Unipark was teaching a new recruit how to read the mood of a Thornback. The young Krethian named Sevik had arrived 3 weeks ago, one of dozens of failures who had found their way to Yuna's growing movement through underground networks and whispered rumor. Sevik had been expelled from the collective military academy for refusing to participate in live creature training exercises, and she carried the same weight of shame that Yuna remembered from her own classification ceremony. "Watch her eyes," Yuna instructed, gesturing toward the Thornback who sat calmly beside them. "When the pupils contract, she is feeling threatened, and you need to give her space." Sevik trembled slightly but held her ground, and Yuna felt a surge of pride at the young woman's courage. "How do you know when it is safe to approach?" Sevik asked. "You feel it," Yuna replied, placing her hand over her heart. "The connection is not in your head but here, in the part of you that remembers what it means to be afraid and alone." and hoping someone will help. The thornback shifted closer to Sevik and pressed its snout against her damaged arm, the one that had been injured during her expulsion from the academy. And Sevik's eyes filled with tears. "She knows you are hurting," Yuna said softly. "And she wants you to know that you are not alone." These moments were what made everything worthwhile. And Yuna had experienced hundreds of them over the past 6 months as her movement grew from 4 outcasts to a network. Spanning 12 worlds, her original squad had become her commanders, each of them developing specialties that complemented Yuna's abilities. J1 trained the combat personnel, teaching them defensive tactics designed to protect creatures rather than kill them. And his gray scales had begun regaining their color as purpose. Replaced the despair he had carried for years. Desik managed their technology networks, coordinating communications between cells on different planets and maintaining the sensor jamming systems that kept them hidden from collective surveillance. Morrow had become a legend among the creatures themselves, known as the healer who walks without fear. And species on every world they visited seemed to recognize him as someone who could be trusted. But the most important member of their leadership was not a person at all. The Shadowmaw had become Yuna's constant companion, her advisor, her friend. And the connection between them had deepened until she sometimes could not tell where her thoughts ended and its thoughts began. It had taught her things about the galaxy that no collective database contained, showing her memories passed down through generations of its kind. Images of a time when creatures and civilizations lived together in balance. The collective had broken that balance, and Yuna was determined to restore their communication device, buzzed with an urgent message from Desik. And Yuna's blood went cold as she read the words, "Valith is coming," the message said. "He will arrive within 6 hours." Everyone in the movement knew that name, and everyone feared it. Commander Valith had personally led the extermination campaigns on 8 different worlds, and his kill count was higher than any other hunter in collective history. If he was coming to the Sara 7, it meant the collective had decided that Yuna's movement was a serious enough threat to warrant their best. "We should evacuate," Sevik said, her earlier courage replaced by visible terror, but Yuna shook her head slowly, watching the sun set through the canopy of ancient trees. "No," she said. "Running would only delay the inevitable. And I am tired of hiding." The Shadowmaw pressed against her side, and she felt its agreement flowing through their bond. "If Valith wants to find me," Yuna announced, "then I will let him find me." She sent a message to her network telling them to maintain their positions and avoid confrontation. And then she walked alone into the clearing where the Zara 7's most dangerous predators gathered. By the time Valith's shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Yuna was waiting for him. She sat cross-legged on a fallen log, surrounded by creatures that should have been tearing her apart. And the Shadowmaw lay curled behind her like a massive guardian. Valith emerged from his shuttle with his weapon raised, his scales flushed dark with the anticipation of combat. And he froze when he saw what was waiting for him. 100 creatures tensed at his approach, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. And Valith had enough experience to know that even his considerable skills could not survive an attack from this many directions. "Commander Valith," Yuna said calmly, not moving from her seat, "I have been expecting you. You are the one coordinating the resistance," Valith replied, his weapon still raised but his voice carrying uncertainty. "I am not coordinating anything," Yuna said. "I am simply listening to voices that the collective has been trying to silence for 3,000 years." The creatures around her shifted but held their positions, and Valith found himself lowering his weapon slightly without understanding why. "You are insane," he said. "These are beasts, monsters, threats to civilization." Yuna smiled sadly and asked him a question that would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. "When did you stop wondering why they fight back?" The jungle at night was alive with sounds that would have terrified Yuna only weeks ago. But now she moved through the darkness with a purpose that burned away her fear. She had left her squadmates at the abandoned research station with clear instructions. And Desik was already working to access the orbital sensor networks while J1 and Morrow prepared supplies for what might become a very long hiding. Yuna traveled alone into the deepest part of the southern continent, following paths that her instincts somehow recognized, even though she had never walked them before. The creatures of Korath IV watched her pass from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the jungle plants. And not one of them moved to attack. She found the Shadow Maw at the entrance to a massive cave system, its dark form barely visible against the stone, and when it saw her approach, it rose to its full height and released a low rumbling sound that vibrated through her chest. Yuna stopped 10 meters away and knelt on a soft earth, making herself small, making herself vulnerable. "I need your help," she said, knowing the creature could not understand her words, but hoping it might understand something deeper. The Shadow Maw studied her with those ancient, intelligent eyes, and Yuna felt a sensation she could not explain, like a presence touching the edges of her mind. Curious and cautious and waiting, she thought about the bombing that would come, picturing the fire falling from the sky, the destruction of everything living on this continent. And she pushed those images outward with all the emotion she could gather. The creature reacted immediately, its massive body tensing, its 6 legs shifting into a defensive posture. It understood. Yuna did not know how, but she could feel that the Shadow Maw had received her warning, and now she pushed another image toward it. Creatures gathering, hiding, surviving beneath the stone where the fire could not reach. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the Shadow Maw raised its head toward the dark sky and released a call that echoed through the jungle like thunder rolling across mountains. The sound traveled for kilometers in every direction, and Yuna felt the vibrations in her bones, in her teeth, in the deepest parts of her being, and the jungle answered from every direction. Creatures began emerging from the shadows, drawn by the Shadow Maw's summons, responding to a signal that had not been used in thousands of years. Thornbacks came first, their razor-sharp spines folded flat against their bodies in a posture of submission that Yuna had never seen documented. Then came the Ravagers, pack hunters that normally killed anything in their territory, now walking calmly alongside prey species as if old enmities had been temporarily forgotten. Flying creatures descended from the canopy, and burrowing creatures emerged from the earth, and within an hour, Yuna found herself surrounded by hundreds of animals that should have been tearing each other apart. They all looked at her. The Shadow Maw moved to stand beside Yuna, and she understood that some form of communication had passed between the creatures. Some consensus reached in ways she could not perceive. She was being given command. "The caves," Yuna said, pointing toward the entrance behind the Shadow Maw. "We need to go deep underground where the sensors cannot find us." She did not know if they understood her words or her gestures or something else entirely. But the creatures began moving. The migration took 3 days. Saya worked without sleep, coordinating the movement of thousands of animals through cave systems that stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. And her squadmates joined her as soon as Desik confirmed that the orbital sensors could not penetrate the dense mineral deposits in the Wadras in the fuzzy Stone Age. Iwan proved invaluable as a scout, his military training helping him identify safe routes and potential dangers. And his respect for Yuna grew with every hour as he watched her manage an impossible situation. Desik used her engineering knowledge to hack into the Solar collective sensor networks, feeding false data that showed the southern continent as empty of significant life signs. And Morrow moved among the creatures with his medical supplies, treating injuries and illnesses with the same gentle care he had once reserved for soldiers. The relationship between the squad and the creatures shifted. During those 3 days, Thornbacks that had once viewed them as threats now stood guard at tunnel entrances, and Ravager packs brought food to the exhausted team members without being asked. A small burrowing creature that Yuna named Sprout began following Desik everywhere. Apparently fascinated by the clicking sounds of her translator. They are not mindless beasts, Morrow observed on the second night. Watching a family group of herbivores share their water source with predators who normally hunted them. They understand cooperation when survival demands it. They have always understood, Yuna replied. We just never bothered to look. On the morning of the third day, the bombing began even deep underground. They could feel the vibrations as massive explosions tore through the surface above. And some of the younger creatures cried out in fear. Yuna moved among them, touching their fur and scales and feathers, projecting calm and safety with every ounce of her being. And slowly the panic subsided. The bombardment lasted 6 hours when it finally ended. Desik accessed her hacked sensors and confirmed what they had feared. The surface of the southern continent had been completely sterilized, transformed into a wasteland of ash and glass. The collective is transmitting victory announcements, Desik reported, her voice heavy with disgust. They are celebrating the successful cleansing of Korath 4. J1 punched a cave wall hard enough to crack his knuckles, and old anger burned in his gray eyes. They will discover the truth eventually, he said. When they send survey teams to confirm the extermination, they will find evidence that creatures survived. Yuna looked at the army gathered in the caves around her. Thousands of lives that the collective had tried to erase. And she felt something new growing in her chest. It was not just the desire to protect, it was the determination to fight back. Then we need to be gone before they arrive, she said. And we need to find others who will help us. The Shadowmaw approached her, and Yuna felt that strange mental connection growing stronger, as if the bond between them was deepening with every shared experience. She received an image in her mind. Other worlds, other creatures, other places where the collective's extermination campaigns had failed to kill everything. The Shadowmaw was showing her a network. Ancient paths between planets that the creatures had used for millennia. Routes that the collective had never discovered. There are others, Yuna said aloud, understanding flowing through her like water. Other survivors on other worlds, hiding from the collective just like we are hiding now. She turned to face her squad mates, her family, the broken outcasts who had chosen to stand with her when everyone else would have run. We saved thousands today, Yuna announced. But there are millions more across the galaxy who need someone to speak for them. Desik clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. You want to start a resistance movement. I want to start a conversation, Yuna corrected. One that the collective has been trying to silence for 3,000 years. Morrow smiled for the first time since Yuna had met him, the expression transforming his ancient face. The failed hunter wants to change the galaxy, he said. I think I would like to see that. The Shadowmaw pressed its massive head against Yuna's shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around it as best she could, feeling the steady rhythm of its heartbeat above them. The fires still burned, but beneath the surface, an army waited, and they had chosen their commander. The Shadowmaw did not kill. Yuna worked on its wounds for nearly an hour, cleaning the deep gash in its side and applying the biofoam from her medical kit. And the creatures simply watched her with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Her squad mates remained frozen at the edge of the clearing, too terrified to run and too confused to help. And J1 kept his weapon raised the entire time, even though his hands trembled visibly when Yuna finally finished. She stood slowly and stepped back, giving the massive creature space to move. The Shadowmaw rose on its 6 legs, testing the weight on its injured limb. And then it turned and disappeared into the jungle without making a sound for a long moment. Nobody spoke. That was the most insane thing I've witnessed in 60 years of combat, Morrow finally said. His voice barely above a whisper. Desik's translator struggled to express the complexity of her emotions as she asked, Why did it not kill you? Yuna could not answer that question because she did not understand it herself. And she simply retrieved her abandoned rifle and suggested they return to the colony over the following weeks. Strange things began happening during their patrols. Creatures that attacked other cleanup squads seemed to avoid the routes that Yuna's team traveled. And twice they witnessed packs of thornbacks, vicious predators known for their aggression, simply parting to let them pass through without incident. J1 noticed it first, commenting one evening that they had not fired their weapons in 12 consecutive patrols, a record that seemed impossible given the hostile nature of Korath. 4 Thesic began tracking their encounters in her engineering logs, applying the same analytical precision she had once used for starship systems. And the data confirmed what they all suspected. Something about their squad was different. Yuna started keeping her own notes, filling a small tablet with observations that her squad mates initially dismissed as pointless. She documented the body language of every creature they encountered, noting the positions of ears and tails and limbs, recording the sounds they made and the scents they left behind, mapping the territorial boundaries that seemed invisible to everyone else. You are studying them like they are patients in your clinic, Morrow observed one night as Yuna organized her notes. They are patients. Yuna replied, every creature on this planet is fighting to survive. And they are afraid of us because we come here to kill them. We come here because they kill us, Thesic countered. But her voice carried less certainty than it had in previous conversations. During their 23rd patrol, Yuna discovered something that would change everything. Deep in the jungle, far beyond the usual patrol boundaries, she found the ruins of a structure that did not match any collective architecture she had seen. And her curiosity drove her to explore despite the warnings from her squadmatist. Building had been abandoned for centuries, its walls covered in symbols that glowed faintly when Yuna approached. And inside she found data terminals that still hummed with power. Thesic's engineering skills proved valuable as she worked to access the ancient systems. And what they discovered in the recovered files rewrote everything the collective had taught them about the Hunter class. This was a research station, Thesic announced, her functional hand moving across holographic displays, built by a species called the Vathani, who were members of the collective over 4,000 years ago. The files contained detailed studies of the Hunter class. And as Thesic translated the ancient text, the truth slowly emerged. The original hunters had not been killers. They had been mediators, empaths, bridge builders between civilizations and the creatures who shared their worlds. And the classification measured something far more complex than combat potential, empathic resonance. Yuna read from the translated documents. The ability to understand and communicate with non-sentient life forms through emotional connection and behavioral interpretation. The Vathani had considered hunters to be sacred, and their research showed that individuals with this ability could forge bonds with even the most dangerous creatures, turning potential threats into allies and guardians. But the files also revealed why this knowledge had been lost 3,000 years ago. The collective had decided that extermination was more efficient than coexistence, and the Hunter class had been deliberately suppressed because its practitioners kept interfering with elimination campaigns. Hunters who tried to protect creatures were reassigned to dangerous posts and quietly allowed to die, and within a few generations, the knowledge had been forgotten entirely. Your failed classification was not measuring combat ability, Thesic said, staring at Yuna with new understanding in her insectoid eyes. The machines detected something they have not seen in millennia. Yuna thought about the Shadowmaw and the way it had watched her while she treated its wounds. And she realized that she had felt something during that encounter, a connection that went beyond words or logic. We need to tell the collective about this, J1 said. This changes everything we thought we knew. Before anyone could respond, Their communication devices activated with an emergency broadcast, and Commander Drexel's voice filled the abandoned research station. All personnel on Korath 4 are hereby ordered to evacuate to orbital stations immediately, the announcement declared. A full extermination bombing of the southern continent has been authorized and will commence in 48 hours. The blood drained from Yuna's face as she understood what this meant. The southern continent was where most of the planet's creature populations lived, including the deep jungle territories where the largest and most intelligent species made their homes. Thousands of creatures would be incinerated, their ecosystems destroyed, their kind wiped from existence, and somewhere in those jungles, the Shadowmaw who had spared her life was waiting. "We have to go," Morrow said, already moving toward the exit. "The evacuation shuttles will not wait." But Yuna did not move. She stood in the ancient research station, surrounded by the knowledge of a forgotten way. And she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. "I am not leaving," she announced. Her squad mates stopped and turned to face her, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. "The bombing will kill everything," Thesic said, "including you if you stay. Then I will find a way to protect them," Yuna replied. And her voice carried a conviction that surprised even herself. J1 studied her for a long moment, his gray scales shifting in the dim light. And something changed in his expression. He had been disgraced for refusing to kill prisoners who deserved mercy. And now he saw the same impossible choice reflected in the eyes of this strange human woman. "If you stay, I stay," he said. Thesic clicked her mandibles in frustration, but she did not move toward the exit either. And Morrow simply sat down on a fallen pillar, as if settling in for a long wait. "You are all insane," Thesic announced. And then she added, "Tell me what you need me to do." 47 hours remained before the bombing would begin. And Yuna Park, the failed hunter, started planning how to save an entire world. The classification machine hummed with ancient power as Yuna Park stepped inside its cylindrical chamber, and she could feel the energy scanning every cell of her body, every thought in her mind, every instinct buried deep within her human DNA. She had traveled 17 light years from Earth to reach Station Verith 9, leaving behind her veterinary clinic in Bizin and the animals she had spent her life healing. All because humanity had finally been invited to join the Galactic Collective, and volunteers were needed to prove that humans deserved their place among the stars. The alien instructors watched through transparent walls, their faces showing the same bored expressions they had worn for the 12 humans who went before her. And Yuna tried to calm her breathing as golden light swept across her skin. Commander Drexel, a towering Valorian with 4 arms and scales the color of dried blood, checked his data tablet without enthusiasm. And beside him stood 2 Krethian observers whose insectoid eyes reflected the machine's glow. The scanning process lasted only 30 seconds. But to Yuna, it felt like hours. And when the machine finally released its verdict, the silence that followed was unlike anything she had experienced. Commander Drexel stared at his tablet, then looked up at Yuna, then looked back down at the tablet again. "This cannot be correct," he said in a voice that carried no emotion. "What is my classification?" Yuna asked, stepping out of the chamber on shaky legs. The Krethian observers began making sounds that Yuna's translator identified as laughter. A high-pitched clicking that echoed through the sterile white room. "Hunter class," Drexel announced. And the laughter grew louder. Rank F. Yuna did not understand why this was funny, but the reactions of every alien in the room told her that something had gone terribly wrong with her results. "Hunter class has not been assigned in over 3,000 years, Drexel explained, his tone now carrying something that sounded almost like pity. "It is an obsolete classification from primitive times when species needed to track and kill beasts with crude weapons." "What does rank F mean?" Yuna asked, It means failure, one of the Krethian observers answered, still clicking with amusement. It means you scored the lowest possible result in combat potential. Yuna felt her face grow hot with embarrassment, and she wished she could disappear into the floor beneath her feet. The other human volunteers have received respectable classifications, with 3 earning warrior class and 2 achieving the prestigious guardian designation. And even the lowest scorer before her had managed defender class at rank C. There must be some mistake. Yuna said, "Can I take the test again?" Drexel shook his massive head. The classification machine does not make mistakes, and each individual may only be scanned once in their lifetime. He tapped his tablet several times, and Yuna watched his expression shift from pity to cold indifference. "You will be assigned to Cleanup Squad 7 on planet Korath 4, he announced. "Report to Docking Bay 12 in 1 hour." "What is a cleanup squad?" Yuna asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer would not be good. "Korath 4 is infested with dangerous creatures," Drexel replied. "Cleanup squads patrol the surface and eliminate any beasts that threaten our mining operations." The Krethian observers had stopped laughing now, and Yuna noticed they were looking at her with what her translator interpreted as sympathy. The survival rate for cleanup squads is approximately 12%. Drexel added, "You will be provided with basic equipment and a standard sidearm." 1 hour later, Yuna stood in Docking Bay 12 with a small bag containing everything she owned, watching a battered transport ship descend through the atmospheric shields. The ship looked like it had survived 100 battles and lost most of them, its hull scarred with blast marks and patches of mismatched metal that suggested frequent emergency repairs. When the loading ramp lowered, 3 figures emerged, and Yuna realized these would be her new squadmate test. First was a Valorian like Commander Drexel, but smaller and younger, with scales that had faded to a dull gray color, and he walked with a slight limp that suggested an old injury that had never healed properly. His name was J1, which surprised Yuna because it sounded Korean, and she later learned that he had chosen the name himself after developing a fascination with human culture during his years of exile. The second was a Krethian whose right arm hung motionless at her side, the result of nerve damage that had ended her engineering career with the collective fleet, and her name was the sixth. Third was an elderly Sindari whose blue skin had turned pale with age, and Morrow had served as a combat medic for 60 years before requesting transfer to the most remote assignment available. Seeking a quiet place to await death, none of them seemed happy to see Yuna. "Another human," Desic observed, her functional arm gesturing dismissively. "The last one survived 3 days. 2 days, Morrow corrected. He died on the evening of the 2nd day." J1 said nothing, simply turning and walking back up the loading ramp, expecting the others to follow. The journey to Korath 4 took 6 hours, and during that time Yuna learned that her new squad mates had all requested this assignment specifically because they wanted to be forgotten. J1 had been a decorated soldier until he refused to execute prisoners during a border conflict, and his disobedience had cost him everything. Desic had reported safety violations in the fleet shipyards and been rewarded with a mysterious accident that destroyed the nerves in her. Morrow simply said he had lived too long and seen too much, and his eyes carried a weight that Yuna recognized from her years of treating animals who had given up on life. They did not ask about her failed classification, and she was grateful for their silence. Korath 4 was a world of dense jungles and perpetual twilight, its thick atmosphere blocking most of the light from its distant sun, and the mining colony sat like a metal scar on the planet's surface, surrounded by walls and turrets designed to keep the native creatures out. Their first patrol began immediately after landing. With no time for rest or orientation, J1 handed Yuna a pulse rifle that felt awkward in her hands. and she realized she had never fired a weapon at a living creature in her entire life. "Stay behind us," Desic instructed. "Try not to make noise, and if something attacks, run back toward the colony." They moved into the jungle in single file, their boots sinking into soft earth that smelled of decay and growth and ancient. Secret Yuna found herself studying the plants and insects they passed, her veterinarian instincts cataloging every detail, noticing patterns in the way the vegetation grew and the paths that local creatures had worn through the undergrowth. 2 hours into the patrol, Morrow raised his hand to signal a stop, and everyone froze through the shadows ahead. Yuna could see something massive moving between the trees, and her translator identified the warning that Desic whispered as a single word. Shadowmoth creature was the size of an earth elephant, covered in black fur that seemed to absorb light, with 6 legs and a head dominated by jaws that could bite through metal plating. But Yuna noticed something else, something her squad mates had not seen. The Shadowmaw was limping, favoring its front left leg, and dark liquid dripped from a wound in its side. Her squad mates slowly raised their weapons, preparing to fire, and Yuna knew that their small arms would only anger a creature of this size. That attacking would mean certain death for all of them. She did not make a conscious decision about what happened next. Her body simply moved, stepping past her frozen squad mates and walking toward the wounded monster. "Human," Desic hissed. "What are you doing?" Yuna did not answer, because she did not know the answer herself. She approached the Shadowmaw with her hands raised and empty, her rifle abandoned on the ground behind her, and she began speaking in a soft voice, using the same tone she had used for thousands of frightened animals in her clinic. The creature turned its massive head toward her, and she could see intelligence in its eyes. Along with pain and fear and exhaustion, Yuna knelt in the mud before the monster, opened her medical kit, and began treating its wounds.